welcome. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Sally McLaughlin, and I'm the Executive Director of End of Life Washington, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 2017 annual meeting here at our new venue, the Seattle Japanese Baptist Church. This church has been a hospitable neighbor since we relocated our offices to the third floor of the King County Medical Society. They are unbelievably gracious and allow us to use their parking lot whenever we hold our meetings, and they were very receptive to holding today's gathering when we asked. And we are very grateful for their tangible signs of goodwill and friendship. I think that it's important to share a little bit about the long and rich history of this church in this neighborhood. It was founded in May of 1899. So that's 100, if my math serves me, that's 118 years ago now. The original pastor's wife, Mrs. Okasaki, established work and living accommodations for the picture brides of the 1900s. Young Japanese women who had exchanged photographs with Japanese men in America, whom they'd never seen or met, and with whom they registered to marry in Japan. These women arrived on boats in the port of Seattle, where they met their legal husbands and exchanged marriage vows. This took time, however, so Mrs. Okasaki founded the Fujin home where they could live while they waited to get established. She then arranged for classes to teach the young married couples English, using the Bible as the dominant lesson plan. World War II and the forced evacuation of all Japanese Americans from the West Coast, citizens as well as those who were not allowed to become citizens, caused the JBC to close in the spring of 1942. But the church continued to meet in Minidoka Relocation Center in Idaho. The gymnasium where we gathered earlier was used to store the possessions of Japanese American families who were interned during the war. So as you can see, this is a site rich in complicated history, and we stand on a firm foundation of activism, advocacy, and a dedication to doing what is right here at the Seattle Japanese Baptist Church. And I feel that it gives us a fitting setting for a gathering of our Right to Die supporters and volunteers. So welcome, irashimasu. As the Director of End of Life Washington, I am pleased to serve on the Washington End of Life Coalition Steering Committee. And as a matter of fact, our annual meeting is coming up on Friday, November 17th, and you're all encouraged to attend. One of the best parts of that duty is the opportunity it has afforded me to meet and periodically hang out with my new best friend, our keynote speaker today, Evergreen Health Medical Center's Director of Hospice and Palliative Care, Dr. Hope Wetchkin. We're so close I even shared my cold with her. So while she might look like a mild-mannered family medicine physician, Hope is actually a force of nature. She is a multifaceted, multi-talented artiste. She's a violinist, a singer, a composer, dancer, actress, playwright, impresario. Oh, and she's also a wife and the mother of a 7-year-old son. And did I mention that she's also a physician and a hospital administrator? I did, right? Okay. At any rate,
can she play the drums?
well, probably. Most likely, and if we're not careful, she might. Hope is the embodiment of the adage, if you want something done, ask a busy person. In November of 2015, the Jones Playhouse in the University District presented The Withing Project, a theatrical oratorio that explored shared consciousness and the humanity of withing, or being with another. Inspired by an actual encounter with a hospice patient diagnosed with end-stage liver cancer, The Withing Project was led by Hope Wetchkin, who not only sang and played violin in the production, but also composed all of the music. Melinda Bargreen of the Seattle Times said of Hope, "The music world is full of fascinating people, but in more than 3 decades of writing about music, I've never met anyone quite like Hope Wetchkin." And now it's your turn to experience hope. Please help me welcome Dr. Hope Wetchkin, who will speak, if somewhat sing about whipping, entanglement in medicine and everyday life.
Thank you, I think, so much for that introduction, Sally. The good thing is that my mom is here sitting in the front row, and she can attest to you that I am definitely not a dancer.
I made that part up. I thought it
It really is truly an honor for me to be here with you today. I want to tell you about a patient I met at the Evergreen Hospice Care Center a few years ago. Gisela was born in Germany in 1947. Her mother had been a nurse in the eastern part of the country during World War II, and her father, before he was conscripted into the German Navy, had worked as a piano builder. Her parents married during the war, and as the war was about to end, the couple was captured by the Danish army, and Gisela's older brother was born in captivity in a Russian camp. Gisela's parents and their newborn baby escaped the camp and returned to Germany, where Gisela was born 2 years later, in Frankenbach, near Stuttgart, which had been bombed steadily between 1940 and 1945. In 1951, when Gisela was 4, her family moved to Brazil, and Gisela spent most of her childhood there, growing up in the port city of Porto Alegre and becoming fluent in Portuguese. In 1963, at the age of 16, she returned to Germany to live with her grandparents. By 1969, just 6 years later, Gisela had already married and divorced a visiting American and had 2 children, ages 3 and 4. She was a single mother now, living with a roommate who was dating an American soldier stationed nearby in Heilbronn. As these things go, one night her roommate's boyfriend brought another friend along, and John, age 19, saw what he's described to me since as the most gorgeous girl this guy had ever laid eyes on. Plenty of double dates ensued, and eventually, after lots of proper German goodnight handshakes, John requested to say goodnight the American way. Gisela and John married in Germany, and together with the 2 children, arrived in Marysville in 1970. Soon thereafter, Gisela's 3rd child was born. 4 days after his son's birth, John was deployed to Vietnam, where he was stationed for a number of months. After John's return, the 1970s were marked for Gisela by the efforts of raising a family. Always outgoing, Gisela worked as a waitress, and John first worked as a mechanic, then as a house painter, and then finally he figured out how to start building glass-ply boats. Before long, he'd started his own boat building company here in Puget Sound. Gisela, while holding fast to her German work ethic and sense of order, worked steadily at losing her German accent in an effort to blend in as much as she possibly could. By the time the family moved to Kenmore in 1982, Gisela was at the center of Kenmore community life, continuing to work as a waitress at Kenmore Lanes and working hard to raise her children. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't perfect. Her oldest son struggled with drug and alcohol addiction and was sent to juvenile detention for 2.5 years at the age of 17. The other children spent weekends visiting him, and resentments smoldered. Gisela was strict, and to describe her as controlling was probably a bit of an understatement. She wanted things done a certain way. Her house was immaculate, and while she had many friends who loved her, She got in trouble more than once for, as her husband John said, asking too many questions, giving too many opinions, and letting her mouth go. Gisela was a force of nature. She was not a saint. By the mid-1980s, Gisela's attention to detail and her ability to control operations made her the perfect fit to join John in his thriving yacht-building business. Before long, they were serving some of Seattle's most prestigious clients, and by the time they both retired from the business in 2010, they had established themselves as one of the premier yacht-building companies in the area. In 2013, they were living the dream. They had bought a house on a golf course, they were comfortably retired, and they were planning their travels to Italy and Paris. But a persistent cough led to a diagnosis of lung cancer, and the next 9 months were spent first at Evergreen, and then in and out of the University of Washington Medical Center with surgery, the subsequent and possibly delayed discovery of widespread metastases, then radiation, chemotherapy, and eventually near financial ruin. Gisela was shattered, and as John said, she was scared to death. To say that she was not at peace with the idea of her own death when she came onto Evergreen Hospice at the end of that August would, again, be something of an understatement. She refused most things: oxygen, pain medication, medical equipment, and visits from hospice staff, unless they were on her own quite specific terms. And she suffered enormously from pain, from hallucinations, from insomnia, from anxiety, and maybe most of all, from disappointment. Not only with the medical system that she felt had failed her, but also with her oldest son, who was still drinking, using drugs, and in terrible health, and with the fact that her 2 younger children, previously best friends, had been estranged from each other for more than 4 years following a family argument. Eventually, Gisela's care at home became untenable. The hospice home team had done heroic work, but Gisela was in a crisis of pain and agitation, so inpatient care was the only option. In the last week of that September, Gisela came with her exhausted husband to the hospice care center, which is where I met her. The next week was, John told me later, the most difficult and the most transformative of Gisela's life. John, attentive to say the least, was sent home each night by the nurses, very firmly, with strict instructions to sleep and to not show up till the next morning. Mysteriously, Gisela's 2 estranged children appeared in her room at the same time. It turns out their father had arranged this without anyone else's knowledge, told them both to show up individually at the assigned time, and for the first time in many years, Gisela's warring children were with her and with each other. Not a lot was said, apparently, when they were in the room together. But slowly, an unspoken, silent reconciliation between brother and sister began to take hold at Gisela's bedside. Gisela's oldest son came from the hospital, chest tubes in place, to visit his mother. And on several occasions during that week, the whole family sat together in her room as they had many years before. They simply sat. They were with her, and they were with each other. And Gisela relaxed. Gisela relaxed. Her medications stayed about the same. She still whispered instructions from her bed about when to feed the dog and how to clean the house and who should visit when. But overall, her grip on everything and everyone around her loosened. In time, Gisela became a little less responsive, and a week after she was admitted to the hospice care center, she died peacefully. Actually, miraculously, peacefully, with her son holding her hand and her previous enemy, Gisela's daughter, and his previous enemy, his sister, close by. An unusual thing happened for me the morning that Gisela died. You'd think that as a hospice doctor, I'd be present at many, many deaths, and that being in the presence of a patient's body, a patient just around the time of death, would be fairly routine. But I realized as I stepped into Gisela's room to say goodbye to her family members, who it turns out had just left, that it's actually very rare that I'm alone with a patient in the time just surrounding death. And this was an unusual occasion for me. I was tired. It was the end of the week for me, and I was busy. But the sight of Gisela lying under a beautiful handmade quilt with, yes, a rose in her hand, somehow compelled me to sit next to her that Sunday morning in the late September light. Her face was calm. The struggles and the drama now had come to an end. But something had definitely happened, and not just for Gisela, with her son and daughter both at her bedside. Clearly, Gisela had been affected by their presence, even as very little was said. But what was also obvious was that something had happened to her children. They were changed simply by being with her in silence and with each other in silence, so much so that they'd set down their weapons in what they'd both previously known for sure was going to be a battle to the finish. And this caused me to wonder, what happened? What actually happened to Gisela in that final week? How had she navigated this final, most enormous, and for her, most terrifying change? Did she just succumb? Did she lose herself? Did she capitulate or just give up? Or was it just drugs? Was her personality simply dissolved in a haze of lorazepam? And what on earth had happened to her kids? How did just being with their mom and with each other result in such a reconciliation? And for that matter, what had happened with me? What was going on when simply witnessing these interactions and then being with Gisela in the moments before and after her death had left me with the feeling that one might describe as the exact opposite of loneliness? For Gisela, I don't think it was drugs, and I don't think it was capitulation. After all, she continued to instruct her family in her particular Gisela-like way until hours before she died. She was in control. She hadn't abandoned her core. And, as I mentioned, her medications never changed all that much from when she came into the hospice center the week before. As for Gisela's children, I don't think it was the few words that passed between them, because what they told me afterwards was that they hardly said a word to each other when they were both with their mom. And for me, it certainly wasn't anything that was said. Was it the light? The room? Was it just the fact that I was tired, and therefore that much more likely to find myself in that liminal space in which you can feel that you're entangled with something much bigger than yourself? Around that time, a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Leanne Standish, shared with me the preliminary findings of a study that's currently ongoing at the University of Washington, deep in the bowels of the School of Medicine. For any of you who know that place, you know what I mean. In this study, a pair of subjects who know each other well is selected. They might be friends, or lovers, siblings, or musical partners. They're selected in part because they have an acknowledged connection with each other. At the start of the experiment, both subjects are given the same directions. Concentrate on your partner, the other subject, and do everything you can to connect with, to be with the other person. Subject number 1 is seated alone in a soundproof room in front of a computer screen. When the experiment begins, subject number 1 sees a black screen. Then, at random intervals, a gray and white checkerboard pattern flashes on the screen. Meanwhile, subject number 2 is lying on his back in an MRI machine in a separate room that's located down the hall. This is a serious machine. It's not a regular MRI, but a functional MRI, or fMRI. Instead of acting like a camera that just takes still pictures, this machine is like a video camera that takes a movie. In this case, a movie of the changes in blood flow in the brain. When there's more blood flow to part of the brain, the blue color on the fMRI gets darker, like you see there. When there's less flow, the blue gets lighter. This study was done with more and more pairs of people. Has been going on over the last number of years and is still going on with pairs of people at the University of Washington. But in this preliminary analysis, the results were compared to fMRIs of 300 people who were just lying in the scanner with nothing going on. The movies of the brains of people at rest served as controls. The results were then pooled into a short movie that I'm going to show you in a minute. In the background of the movie, you'll see the screen that was shown to subject number 1 each time the experiment was run. That screen that went between black and checkerboard at random intervals. Most of the time the screen's black, and then you'll see at certain intervals in the background, the checkerboard pattern appears. In the foreground of the screen, you'll see a composite picture of all of the brains of all of the subject number 2s, the subjects who were in the scanner. You'll notice a focus on the back part of the brain where visual processing takes place, in the occipital cortex. You'll see changes in blood flow that are marked by transitions from darker blue to lighter blue to back again to darker blue. Remember, when the blood flow is greater, it shows up as darker blue, and when it's less, it shows up as lighter blue. I'm going to step down and we're going to see about 2.5 minutes of this movie. There's no sound.
Can we douse the lights?
Good.
Look.
That's a miracle.
I'll tell you a little bit